Benola Cerebral Palsy Initiative. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Now, the first question is this. Not so many people are well educated or informed when we say persons with disabilities, and being able to differentiate that with people with special needs. Now, Mr. Gbadebo, can you just take us through this?
Well, the question I would ask is there really a difference? We're talking about semantics here. Man likes to look at himself as being normal, and then some other people as either not being normal or be less than normal. And it comes from the perception that because they are unable to do certain things, then it makes them either not normal or abnormal. But they've been created in certain ways. So one that cannot see, that cannot hear, that has missing limbs, that has a disability that makes them maybe a little bit unsightly, and all that is considered disabled. As time went on, the issues of handicap, of limitations, and all those things started to come on. And at some stage, you'll find people started to kick, don't call me disabled, don't call me limited, don't call me handicapped. And so it started to come on. And then when you look at, there are some groups called invisible disabilities.
Exactly.
You have, asthma, high blood pressure, diabetes. These things limit you not all the time, but it limits your ability to do certain things. You're too tall, you're too short, you're too fat, you're too slim. They're all problems. So then, it started to come that, look, we must look for a word that encompasses all of them. And that's where persons with disabilities comes in. It tries to cover everybody. And if we use the term widely, you'll be surprised to find that just about everybody fits in there.
Most definitely.
Wow. Let's hear your thoughts as well, Mr. Femi.
That's David.
Mr. David Anyele.
Okay, thank you so much. Just as you rightly said, it's about semantics. The people that use special needs are people who are in the educational sector. These are the terminologies they use to define people with disabilities. So in the educational sector, they classify them as special needs children or otherwise. But globally, we have persons with disabilities. There is a convention called UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. The convention defines who is a person with disability. It went further to say that anybody who has sensory or physical impairments that hinder the individuals from participating on equal basis with others is classified as a person with disability. So sensory impairments are not visible, as well as mental health impairment. They are not visible. They are not physical. You cannot feel it. But when it has to do with sensory impairments goes into two different ways. That is to say, it may be sight impairment or hearing impairment, which is sensory. Then when we talk about physical impairment, it has to do with people who are physically challenged by reason of amputation or spinal cord injured or other forms of physical disability that hinders the individual from participating on equal basis with other members of the society. So, in as much as you have different form of disability that may disturb you, but if it does not hinder you from participating on equal basis with others, then a doctor is in a better position to classify you, with a person with disability or otherwise. Other than that, anybody can come up and say, "Oh, I have a financial impairment, I have education impairment," and he can equally classify himself as disability because it's a disability, inability to do one of the, but it does not hinder him or her from participating on equal basis with others.
From your explanation now, this also tallies with the World Health Organization classification, which was made in 2001, which says, well, persons with disabilities, we categorize those who have mobility or physical impairment, spinal cord disability, head injuries, brain disability, either acquired or traumatic. We also have the vision impairment, hearing disability, cognitive or learning disabilities as well. And then psychological disorders, persons who have personality disorder and other mental illnesses. Now, these vary because somebody who is visually impaired, the needs are totally different from somebody who can't hear properly or who can't easily move. But the stigma at the end of the day is the same. We find out that when somebody has cancer, for example, everybody runs to that person and say, oh, I hope you're feeling fine, let's attend to you, and all of those. But when you hear of persons with disability, the approach is totally different. What informed this whole culture where we respond to conditions that are of concern and we just respond totally differently with stigmatization, with marginalization, and a whole lot of negativity? When we have these numbers, according to the World Health Organization and other reports, about 10% of the world's population make up individuals with persons with disability.
Well, you see, we're living particularly in a country where three major problems hold us back. We have religion, we have tradition, and then we also have other beliefs. So there's also a large amount of ignorance. You see, what you don't know, you fear. And when religion or traditional institutions now attach something to it, that it's either diabolical or evil, then people get afraid. And so that's what you find with a lot of conditions that look a little bit different. For instance, the child being born with missing limbs. If you remember, before Melis Lester's time in the East, in the Calabar, southeast part of this country, even having multiple births was seen as weird.
Exactly.
Okay, and so it is these beliefs that we're having to deal with in our society. And some of these conditions come with maybe seizures, they come with children drooling, and especially if the parents are not being properly informed and are not taking adequate care of these children, then you also have the issue of maybe they may not be that sightly. So the end result is that society shrinks back. You think it's contagious. You think it can be hereditary or passed down. So a father who's doing well has a child that has some kind of disability, hides the child because the society may say, okay, he has used that child's head for the money. That's why he has money. Another person may feel that it's a sign of a failure on his part. And so he doesn't want people to know that he has a child like that. And so there are lots of highly placed people in our society who either hide the child or send the child abroad because they just can't live with society, identifying them with that. So these are the multiple things that we're having to deal with in our society that has caused stigma, that's caused fear, that's caused a lot of problems.
Not to belabor this, but I'll come to you, David, because you're the convener of the Coalition of Disability Organization. You deal with lots of people with disability. Can you give us an idea of how it is to exist in a country where stigma is the norm among people towards people with disability?
Yeah, I'm a person with disability. So when we discuss issue of stigma, discrimination, I would like, personal experience. I was not born with disability. I lost my two hands in Freetown, Sierra Leone 20 years ago. That was January 1999.
Where exactly? I didn't get that.
In Freetown, Sierra Leone.
Freetown, okay.
January 1999. And when I came back to Nigeria, by special grace of God, I was evacuated by the Nigerian contingent of ECOMOG. I was flown back. I was treated at military hospital Yaba. After my discharge, a signal was given to my state government to take care of my rehabilitation. The then civilian governor Chief Joseph Okalo. Guess what? The state denied me rehabilitation. I moved to Abuja to request for rehabilitation, acknowledging that it is Nigerian exuberance in Freetown that led to my limb loss, and the state denied me rehabilitation. The stigma and discrimination we suffer in this country is being propelled by the state due to their irresponsibility.
What was the excuse, if I may ask?
The excuse is just they don't want to see people with disabilities. They classify you as a troublemaker. They classify you as someone who is not supposed to come out. So, by reason of that behavior, the state is in the forefront of promoting stigma discrimination, and other harmful practices. Then you come to the community, you know, just as he rightly said, the society sees you as a result of the sin you commit. Even as at day before yesterday, I was sharing my testimony on the 20 years anniversary of my limb loss. And someone has also mentioned that you are not saying what you committed in Sierra Leone. Somebody said it to me. Yeah. So somebody said, I was on my Facebook wall. You know, I had about, over 550 comments. And I was going through it, and somebody said, "You've not." And one guy challenged him. Said, "Yeah, we know him. We know what happened." So even the then Minister for Sports and Social Development, who I approach, Mr. Demishi Sango, I approached him for support. He told me, "David, you committed crime in Sierra Leone. That was why your 2 limbs were chopped off." I had to bring up my medical report from General Remu and present it to him. I said, "Sir, this is my medical report." So I experienced it. Tim Minakaya, who was then Minister for Health, also exhibited, stigma, discrimination to me. So when we talk about people who exhibit this behavior that undermines and hinder people with disabilities, there are people in high places in this country.
Could that be why the disability bill is still pending, do you think?
No, it has been signed yesterday.
Okay,
yes.
The president signed it yesterday. It is because of this ignorance. There are people who feed fat from what we call charity-based approach of addressing disability. So because they feed fat from it, they won't like a social, model approach or right-based approach of addressing disability. So they will struggle to undermine, coupled with the then Minister of Women Affairs, whose, intention towards that bill was not good for us. So they were the people that killed it at the initial time. That is in 2011 and 2015. But this current Minister of Women Affairs graciously are in tune with the UN Convention on Persons with Disabilities.
Okay, but the length of time, the back and forth before the fight was won, did we have to go through all that?
Yeah, we're not supposed to go through it if we are in a society that value human lives. If we're in a society that believes that all lives are precious. So in as much as the state does not believe that all lives are precious, so you continue to struggle in this matter. We are so honored that His Excellency President Muhammad Buhari, during his campaign in 2015 as APC presidential candidate in Lafia, Nasarawa State, March 21st, 2018, promised that if he gets to power, that he's going to work with National Assembly to sign a disability, act for us. And that was the key message we used to engage him, all this while, we agitated for this. Because as of last week, everybody heard that the president said he was not aware. And we insisted, I insisted, that the bill was transmitted on the 18th of December 2018. And people said, "Oh, David, you're not correct." I said, "I'm correct." And before you know it, the documents start coming out. Today, we celebrate.
Sure.
We celebrate, this, the reign of a law or an act that protects all, irrespective of ability or disability.
It's definitely a new dawn. But one of the responses that we've also gotten is that certain conditions are heightened when we don't have sound healthcare system or sound educational system to be able to respond to these issues. Now, in our healthcare facilities, there are some cases whereby persons who would still be walking on their 2 legs are now in wheelchairs. There are cases whereby people who fireburn instances, who are not supposed to be walking around with scars or go blind or lose their ears and all of those, have lost those because our response has also been pretty poor when it comes to attending to accidents and near-fatal incidences. What's also your thoughts on that as well? Our response as a nation.
Yeah, you see, just as we say we are a developing country, and when we don't have, qualified people heading institutions, we continue to run into this kind of crisis. When corruption is the order of the day, when process of recruitment and hiring of people is being undermined by reason of tribe or religion, you continue to have this kind of issue. The reason is simple. As I said earlier, in other crime, all lives are precious. and the state is held responsible to ensure that all lives are protected. Where people cannot hold the state responsible, all this gap will continue to occur, be it from the emergency response team or the fire brigade, group, or by traffic warders who are supposed to do the needful, or individuals supposed to do the good construction of our roads. In as much as corruption is pervasive in the society, this kind of situation will continue to increase. As I always tell people, that today, one of the greatest drivers of disability is corruption. Corruption breeds poverty, and poverty breeds disability. So they form multiple vicious circles, continue to put us in the way we find ourselves.
Let's come back to you, Femi. In Nigeria, we're told that it is not the lack of laws, but the willpower to implement laws. Now, the disability bill is just a day old. Are we going forward?
Well, the good thing is that the bill's come out, and it's come out with also the establishment of an office to implement it. It says that the office will be manned by an executive secretary. So that is another major thing, because an enabling environment must be created. And then we must also create policies to make sure they work. A lot of things have been spelled about charges of people who don't do their job, ensuring that there's access, ensuring that transportation is there and even giving 5-year moratorium to public buildings to make sure they're accessible. But you must now bring in the enforcing tools to make sure that people can go around and hold them responsible that all these things are put in place. We've had a lot of laws. I'll tell you, like for instance, they'll tell you in the medical bills, it says that children under 5 are entitled to free medical care. Go to any health care center and all. Then the people will ask you, who's going to pay? Because you've set up a law, but you've not put the funding there. You also have not trained, like he said about, why we have so many disabled people in our country. It's because the medical facilities, healthcare generally has not been given the right attention. We have some brilliant doctors in this country, but most of them will tell you that they don't have the enabling tools. The equipment is either not there, or power. You're doing major surgery with, touchlight or
sometimes there's no oxygen at all.
So you find when you see a doctor who is demoralized, overwhelmed by his inability to do what he knows he can do, it's sad. And so there is a lot that must be done.
Now, Femi, away from the healthcare sector, we also have to look at education as well. When we talk about inclusion, education forms the bedrock for human development. At the end of the day, we always see we have special schools for people with disabilities. Now, in Nigeria, we only have about 3-4 higher institutions where we have for people with disabilities. And another cause that people are pushing is that we even have to have a mainstream education system, right from basic, senior and junior high school to tertiary levels, where we have people with disabilities or with special needs being incorporated in the curriculum and then in the plan of the education process. Your response?
Well, you remember I told you about lack of knowledge being a major problem. Education solves a lot of problems. It opens doors. Many people who see themselves as disabled, if they can be empowered, would be able. Differently able, but they'll be able. Many of them will be able to earn income. I'll tell you, that woman with twins in the market begging for money, those children are the income earners for the family. And it's just that it's not properly structured. If it's properly structured, they'll even earn more money. So what are we talking about? Now people are talking about inclusion. But inclusion is something we must get clearly. Inclusion is about getting somebody who has proven that, a child that has proven that they have reached a level of independence living. Maybe toileting and all that, and also intellectual ability to cope in a normal class. Then we put, if they are not at that level, that child will be bullied and that child will not learn. Now, then we also have to look at the rest of the students. Are they ready to take in somebody who looks different? We have to look at the parents. Are the parents ready to have their child in a school or in a classroom with a child that is different? So there's a lot of advocacy, a lot of things that need to be done to change the mindset that we're stuck in this country. The teachers also. Not every teacher can be a special needs teacher, but we can train every teacher to identify a child that appears to need some extra help, so that that child, instead of being left behind, is put forward. If you go to some of our private public schools, that child that's not doing well, instead of being put in front, is actually pushed to the back of the school, to the classroom. So these are problems that we need to resolve. Special schools, sorry. Okay. You know, we have a few special schools scattered around the country, but things have gone beyond that. Because unless person needs, you know, vocational skills, if it's because of intellectual capacity, then, you know, there are different schools now that, you know, what you need for autism or Down syndrome or autism, etc., are different. So outside this country, the move is away from one sack for all the children. And luckily, there are private schools that are beginning to address these things in Nigeria.
Wow, there's so much more we'd like to ask, but then we have to round off this segment. We want to thank you so much, David Anyele, convener, Coalition of Disability Organization. Thanks for coming. Thank you. And we also want to thank you as well, Femi Badebo, founder, Benola's Cerebral Palsy Initiative. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Well, it's been insightful. And
absolutely.
The conversation will definitely continue. We're paying a special focus to persons with disabilities, and we still have a larger scope to delve into. Don't go anywhere.
Hey, what's up guys? You're welcome to another edition of Plus Event, and I remain your host, Ifeoluwa Oshukeye.
Your absence isn't an excuse anymore, as Plus Events is all you need, as we bring you the glitz, the glamour, and loads of fun.
Oh, definitely, by no question. He's a living legend.
God forbid, Holy Ghost fire, I know.
I just want to be blown away. I want to be wild. This is 11 years of doing it.
I'm surrounded by so much positivity. No, it's okay.
Yo, what's up, my people? It's your boy Starboy Terry. You're watching
Plus Event
on Plus TV.
Stay glued to Plus TV Africa every Saturday and Sunday, 4:30 p.m. West African time.
First point of accountability is asking questions.
Hello and welcome to Plus Sports and Plus TV Africa. I am Udoka Njoko.
Hi everyone, welcome to Plus Trending.
You cannot continue to recycle poverty while you're spending a lot of money on unproductive ventures.
The government has to feel the impact.
Honorable Commissioner, sir, welcome to the show.
You're watching Plus TV Africa, and this is Tea Time.
I loved the energy when I came in here. It was so positive. I was like, I can't live here.
My real names are Akbofio Kubo, Akborobo Memere.
I think my father is a comedian because most times when he calls me, he's like, yo, make sure you use condom, you know, them girls out there.
So are you telling me I should have shot my shots?
Ife, you are my younger brother.
Age is nothing but a number. What? I'm a vampire.
I believe in equal rights for women, and I also believe that a man is the head of the house, so we need to draw our limits somewhere.
It feels so good. Now can I do my jam now?
Yeah, you can.
Glad to have you back, and if you're just joining us, well, you're watching our election studio where Nigeria decides, and the discussion today is looking at persons with disabilities, the challenges and the way forward. We earlier had some of our guests speaking with us on some of the plight that has been the bane of discussion year in, year out, and now we also have Ijoma Ugu, the convener of Walk Awake Autism, with us, as well as Femi Gbadebo. Thank you very much for still staying behind.
Thank you so much.
Now, it was a new dawn when we all received the news of the disability bill receiving presidential assent over 18 years back and forth. Now, Ijoma, I would like to have your thoughts. What emotions did this strike? Because if we are pushing for people with disabilities and breaking all of the barriers that keep on raising their ugly heads, how do you feel about this bill receiving assent?
Yeah, so many people are excited, but I don't just know why I am not, because maybe I didn't see an encompassing bill. I read through it, through the report on the newspaper, and they were talking about people with hearing impairment and physical disabilities. And then I asked, how about the hidden disabilities? How about people with mental health challenges? How about people with neurodevelopmental delays and impairments? How about all of these people? I know it's going to be a huge thing, but I mean, someone could have at least put them into perspective.
But what other policies then would you rather say we should have? Because if this bill is not, this law is not all-encompassing, and at the end of the day, the laws that we have must always evolve, be amended, and a whole lot more. What would you push for?
I would push for, there's already an inclusion, and then I would push for even the one that's on the table. What are the plans for implementation? How do we go about ensuring that people are doing what the law says? And even when they are not doing it, how do we ensure that if I go to reports, maybe a parent whose child is not being admitted to school because he or she is impaired, even a young person who's not been employed because he or she is impaired, how do you go about addressing these things? So are there all of these things in place to follow the law, to kind of implement and address this? Okay, in the bill they talked about fines of £1 million naira.
Yes,
and
for corporate bodies, 100,000 naira for individuals, and then a term of 6 months of imprisonment for violations.
We all know it's going to be, especially for those with neurodevelopmental impairments, we all know it's going to be like the HIV era. Nobody will stand up and tell you, because you have autism, I am not going to employ you. Nobody will tell you that. They will definitely find some other reason. So these are problems on the background that even the law may not be able to solve. But these are just, they are just concerns that we have. So many people with impairments, well, maybe I'm being one-sided. I'm just thinking about neurodevelopmental impairments, mental health impairments. These people are not captured, and even with the law, I still see a lot of loopholes.
Wow, Ijoma has touched on something that I'm sure Femi would like to jump on. Now, she's talking about deficiencies in the bill that has been passed. What's your take on that?
Well, this is a bill that emanated from 2000, like you said. 18 years ago. At that time, disability in Nigeria was more about what you could see. And that's why when you hear governments doing something about disability, they're doing wheelchairs, walking sticks, canes for the blind and braille and all that, even maybe hearing aids. But things have evolved now. And the awareness, especially from those pushing autism and so many other things, has just exploded. And so now we understand. Look at the issue of mental health. Look at, the case of depression and suicides that we had of late. So people are aware. And so we need to celebrate that now there's a law. The next thing is interpretation of the law. We must test the law. We must define what is disability in Nigeria. Okay? And as you begin to define it, it begins to capture everybody. And it is for the various stakeholders, those who are in these other groups, to take the law, tear it apart, and identify where they're left out, and begin to push for inclusion in those arts. So to me, I celebrate it. It's one big step. And the next is for us, stakeholders out there, to come together and begin to work to make these things more clearly understood by everybody.
Now, don't you think that the imposing of the fines for violation or discriminating against persons with disability is one way to ensure that, well, we correct that narrative where we always have that discrimination?
You see, you don't make a law without a penalty. So what they've done is to put a penalty, and the penalty, like you see, is on corporate bodies.
Individuals as well.
Well, on individuals, if I'm not nice to you, you probably spend more than 100,000 to take me to court to prove that I wasn't nice to you because you're disabled. But at least it is there, and somebody needs to test it, and now it can be tested. The rest of it, I would say, is you need to talk to some parents. Some of us who deal with parents and all, parents are ready. Parents have been, even on this issue of admission into schools. But then you must always look on both sides. Is the school really ready? Is the school, do they have the staff? And so on. So a lot of awareness, a lot of education has to take place. And then, of course, as we do that, loopholes are identified. And the only person that can fill these loopholes is not that woman that decided to just set up a school and now want to make an example of her for not admitting a child. It is the government that has failed to set up enough institutions for this kind of children that should now be made to come to the rescue, or at least to their assistance.
Femi, I'd like to tackle you on that, because so many people have said, well, we don't need special institutions. Instead, we need existing institutions to incorporate these individuals. Now, Ijoma, let's talk about the incorporation of infrastructure, building structures, and a whole lot more. This law now provides a 5-year transitional period within which public building structures and all of those make all of these amendments. But are you optimistic that we'll see any change anytime soon? Even in our hospitals, we know where everybody runs to in cases of medical situation. There are still lapses here and there. So now the busing system, we should have places for persons who would have to go on a wheelchair. It means somebody who is deaf or blind might need a bell to ring and then be able to locate his or her way there and all of those. How don't you think it's a little bit too ambitious to say that we'll be able to achieve this in 5 years beyond just the talk on paper?
Yeah, it might sound ambitious, but had it been we had a history of implementation, had it been we had a history of monitoring, had it been we had a history of just putting a check, I would say it wouldn't be that difficult. But we all know the society we live in. We hardly see anybody going for check, and even when they go, we all know what happens in most cases. So people just go there, look around, get treated like princes and queens, and they walk away. They give warnings and nothing happens after all. Yeah, you got something from me. You don't have the moral right to sanction me. Yes, but the implementation, if there is...
Remember during the Fashola era or regime government, there was an implementation where...
RAMS.
Yes, where you have RAMS and all other infrastructures to just put in place. But like you've rightly said, we don't see any implementation. This government of the Ambode hasn't added to that. So we keep on having these lapses year in, year out. So what should we be looking for as a people now when it comes to having infrastructures that would think of everybody?
Just like every other thing, I think we should be much more involved in this country. We are good at saying, oh, this is none of my business, let me just leave it. I would say that each one of us, anywhere we are, out there, if you're watching, if it is in your powers to do these things, don't think it's none of your business. Do it. It's for the good of every other person out there. So what I think that will be doable is that individuals on their own, without having to be pushed around by the law, should take it upon themselves to include these other people. It could be your, even if it's none of your relatives right now, it could be one tomorrow, someday.
Okay, thank you so much, Ijoma. We're going to focus on special needs, people with special needs. But before we go into that, you talked about implementation. But I think it starts with sensitization and efforts to change attitude.
Yes.
You both people who are working in organizations, and you're advocating for something to happen. Yes. You want people to accept people with disability and, of course, people with special needs. How do we begin to get our people in the mood to do the right thing in relation to people with disability?
Well, it's about attitudinal change, and it's about advocacy, raising awareness. You see, people need to understand that these things are acts of God, acts of nature, and that they are not contagious, they're not infectious, and of course they are not hereditary. And then we also need to do what we in Benolo begin to put a positive face on disability. Unfortunately, most of the disabled that we see in Nigeria are the beggars at street corners, in traffic, who are living very under difficult conditions. So sometimes they're not tidy, they're not healthy, they're not whatever. But if we see that as the picture of disability, then we're missing it. Because a lot of people around us, they're wearing glasses, they're using crutches, they're using wheelchairs, they use other things. But because they're well dressed, because they speak well, we don't even see them as disabled. And then there are people who are denying the fact that they have children or siblings who have this peculiar conditions, or who have hidden disabilities like asthma, like I said, high blood pressure and all, and they keep it away from the public until something happens. That's why sometimes you see these sudden deaths.
Okay. Let's look at people with special needs now, either autistic, dyslexic, or some sort of mental,
cerebral palsy as well,
and a whole lot more. In your scorecard, you've seen the lapses within the Buhari-led government. Has that gone so well? And what would be the solution now in moving forward? Yes, we always identify the challenges, but what in 5 steps or 5 areas, where would you say we should be taking to get things right, and then the next government?
I'd say they started out by saying they were going to do something about disability, and I think in less than a year, the president had appointed a special advisor on disability. A vision-impaired professor in Abuja who has an office. They've done some work, not as much as I would have expected. You see, when you understand the power of advocacy, then you would focus on public enlightenment, because people must understand what disability really is and about that. Then you must focus on government. These changes we're talking about, whether it's access to buildings, whether it's transportation and all, it's easy to say that, you know, you're going to fine a corporate body $1 million if they don't do it. Who's going to find government? So government must set the pace by beginning to do this. And not the way it's been done in the past, where you just find people from Ministry of Work rushing to put ramps without this. You must consult the experts and let the expert tell you what's the right gradient for a ramp and things like that. Then as, you see, we've come to find that disability management is not about just putting people in a home and caring for them. All of us have something to do. Some of us can just be advocates. So what I'm saying is that you go out and you see a public building with a ramp or something, make some noise about it. Let's celebrate that organization. You see somewhere where it's not there or it's not well done, talk about it. Let's shame that organization. Some NGOs now should become, should come out and police the police, so to speak, and be the ones going out to point out what has not been done. And I think with this law that's been in place, and with a concerted effort to make things begin to work, you don't talk about public transport, free public transportation or so on without identifying who gets it and what. Because you see, a blind person needs 2 passes to go on free transport. The same thing with a woman with a child, okay? And it cannot, nobody has a permanent escort. So we must, and then the passengers in the bus are going to ask you, why is he not paying? So they must also understand. So that's where I'm talking about, that a holistic approach must be taken to get this thing done.
Now, thank you so much, Femi. Let me bring you in here, Ijoma, because we are talking about, he talked about government setting the pace. Yeah. We know that the forthcoming election is going to be the first we'll be conducting after the passage of the disability bill. What should change about the conduct of the election?
What should change is that, excuse me, at polling stations, there should be provision for people who are visually impaired and who are also physically impaired. So there should be arrangements, but I'm beginning to feel it's a bit late.
No, INEC has actually said that, well, there will be guides for persons with disability,
they have made the declaration that there will be guides,
But beyond the guides now, what do you expect? We also have people with special needs.
Yes.
Yeah. Is INEC well trained? Is there the chance that INEC officials are going to be trained and well trained to handle the range of people with disability that we expect to turn up for the polls?
I really doubt that, because even these people we are talking about were not even reflected in the bill, in the law. So there is still this gap of even the awareness. So until you know that something exists, before you begin to seek a solution to it. So there was no mention of mental disability or any form of neurological impairment in the law.
So it might be limited to people with physical disability and how to...
Personally, I feel they are not...
Well, you see, what I'd like to add to that is that most people who have learning disability, mental disability and stuff like that can be captured in a voter's ID card. If they have not been captured now, well, it's late for this time.
It's late, yeah.
But for future elections, it's about educating the people. There even the case of those who are unable to leave their homes for one reason or the other, even the old and the aged, that we must begin to recognize that they exist and have somebody vote for them by proxy and so on. So, but for now, one of the things INEC can do is to educate their staff and also educate the public, which I've had them doing on TV, to give priority to people who have disabilities. Because they will not, you wouldn't expect a line of 40 people and somebody who has whatever kind of disability to queue with you, or even a pregnant woman for that matter. So certain things were done in 2015. There was some voter education done, there was some effort done, and now that the INEC chairman has been talking about it and everybody's talking about it, I believe that we will see a marked improvement. It is for the people themselves to be willing to come out and test.
Okay, now I want to take you back to something you said in the last segment. We were talking about how the educational system can assist people with special needs. What should we begin to do to ensure that teachers know just what to look out for, just in case a child is not responding normally? How do we begin to get our teachers to the point where they are able to function for every child?
Workshops. We must conduct a lot more workshops, but by experts. If you're on social media these days, you'll see all kinds of workshops going on. The problem is, are the people conducting these workshops competent enough? The idea is not to make everybody a special needs educator. The idea is to make every teacher aware of the signs and symptoms of limitations in a person, whether it's mental or otherwise. That way, they will be able to identify this child and even help parents. Because you see, the truth is that a lot of parents live in denial. A child is not speaking at 2.5, 3 years. They say it's okay, he's slow. But it's somebody else who can say, this child's not slow, or he's not making eye contact, or whatever. Okay? So you need, and if you, as a friend, tell some mothers, there'll be enemies immediately.
For life.
But you see, when an independent person, either a healthcare practitioner in a hospital or the teacher in the school says, Madam, I think Joe needs to see a specialist, they listen. So that's where we need to train these people so that they are the third parties who waken the parents or who are waking to the parents that something's wrong with children.
But then beyond workshops, don't you think something should happen in the curriculum for educating teachers?
Oh yeah, you know, we've tried to move for it. I mean, it's not just teachers, even for healthcare practitioners. Every healthcare practitioner should know the basic signs of a child that has neurodevelopmental disability, because they're not hitting milestones. And you can detect it sometimes as early as a couple of weeks after birth. Okay, but if you don't teach these symptoms in teachers colleges and health, the various health training institutions, then we'll be stuck with experts who continue to test, and they just send the children for one test after the other, because when the parents say the child has a problem, and so on. Because the curriculum in colleges of medicine, school of nursing, and even this teacher training college does not include anything about, developmental disabilities or early intervention. And they can just be put in as electives, and that would put us in a couple of years way ahead of even some of the countries in the developed world.
Wow. Thank you so much, Femi, for that very insightful one. Ijoma, you are the convener, Walk Awake Autism.
Yes.
I'm curious to know why you chose to campaign for more attention in autism, for people to recognize it as something that we should be talking about. What prompted you, and how far have you gone in this?
Well, I would say I am directly affected by autism spectrum disorder. So what made me go all the way is that at certain point I realized there was a very strong discrimination. And these children, they have what we could call sixth sense. They can sense even when you don't like them. So there was a certain situation where the child was so discriminated against that even herself was feeling so uncomfortable in her own environment. So I had to convene a meeting. I spoke to everyone, starting from the smallest from the youngest to the eldest. I spoke the language they could understand. I told them what is wrong with this child is not contagious first, so don't run away from her. What she has is not like a curse. It's something even science has not identified yet. So, well, at the end of the day, we saw a huge change where there was a high level of acceptance, and the child felt it and felt so happy. So from there, I realized that the huge part of our problem is not the existence of the problem, but the ignorance around it. So I felt that by creating the awareness, the public would get to understand it better. And if a child is sitting by you in a public bus, and then he or she is drooling or doing this way, you don't just stand up and run away and start screaming, and the child feels bad. He has no control over what he or she is doing. And then some parents, if you put this child in their class, they would demand for a transfer. They would demand that their child be taken away from the class. So, but by the time the parent understands that, okay, because many people feel, okay, the child is under spiritual,
that's true.
is possessed by evil spirits. Some people will think, yeah, it's the wickedness of the father or the village people, or all those beliefs. But by the time they understand that this is just a normal anatomical anomaly, something that just happened down the line, and there will be greater level of acceptance.
And in getting things right, especially within our educational system, I believe, would you be of the thought that we now have to teach more of social skills and communication skills, especially children with these special needs? You made mention of the drooling and all of those. I know once in a while, because my mom actually works with a school that has to do with that, and then one of the pointers she keeps on hitting on is that when a child is even drooling, it's either the guide or even the child him or herself would. No, there are some promptings that once in a while he would just take it and clean his mouth and all of those. We have to also train these children to be able to cater for themselves, because people always have this mentality that they are dirty and they are all of these negative things, but it's not right. What should we be telling the children to when it comes to basic etiquettes and social communication skills?
Yes, I call it our community of people living with these disabilities. We have people we call occupational therapists. So they teach the child even how to use the loo, how to clean up, there's usually an occupational therapist and a speech therapist. There's a speech therapist that teaches the child how to talk, massages the muscles. Then the occupational therapist teaches the child even how to hold spoon, because so many of them have a mitochondrial dysfunction or just some of these issues that do not enable them to use their muscles properly. So the occupational therapist tries to help the child to learn how to hold the spoons, even how to walk properly, because some of them, they have the wrong gait. So it's a lot of work. We have like a whole team of people that work with the child just to make them do the simple things you see in everyday child that looks so simple. But it takes months and sometimes years to get a child like this to learn to hold the mouth properly. So these things are in place, but what we still say is that more than 70% of the families cannot afford them. That is still where the government comes in. There should be a place where the ordinary Nigerian could dress his or her child up and take that child for such services. So that is where the government still comes in.
And the parents at home too, once in a while, can always try to put the children to also learn some of these basic skills.
Yes.
You can't say, well, if Kemi is doing fine, you leave Ifeanyi down and nothing.
Yes.
As you tell Femi, pull up your shirt, you're also telling Mary or Philip or whatever his name is, also try to talk in as well. These are just basic skills that have to be developed day in, day out, I believe.
I tell you that any mother that has a child living with disability, even with occupational therapist, even with speech therapist, is doing like 70% more of the work than the therapist. The therapist is just there to kind of give a guide. Because when your child is not meeting up, in fact, you don't even have to wait for the child to meet up. You just get the guide.
There's something you touched on. I don't want us to miss it. You said that there is need for somewhere where parents can take their children to, not necessarily a school. I want to get that right. Is it a school or a center?
Now the target is to shift from having a dedicated institution for them, because by inclusion they can learn the proper behavior. If you put all of them in a place where everybody in that environment is behaving that way, you see even the improved ones will begin to copy those behaviors.
So you're advocating incorporating it in the school system.
I'm advocating incorporating it in the school system. But these days the challenge we have is that going to school sometimes seems like a waste of time. So you see a child of 13 and they are forcing him to learn to write 1, 2, 3. You realize that you are wasting that child's time. So you should find something that the child is very good at. Many of them love music, many of them love knitting, many of them just love doing one thing or the other.
Beyond formal education.
So yes, beyond formal education, there should be a provision to harness the talents of these children that, you know, you see that in so many cases you just realize the formal education is just wasting their time.
Sorry to cut you there, but we also have to have Femi included before we wrap up. Now, you also work with children who have cerebral palsy, and I know we actually had a special report that was done with somebody who has cerebral palsy and is now a lawyer. What would you also say to the fact that we have to still celebrate the little successes but push for more when it comes to
one thing that didn't happen here is they talk about autism being a spectrum. The truth is that everything is a spectrum. If you line up 10 children with the same kind of disability, whether it's autism, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, or whatever, they will present differently. Because, you know, either physically or mentally, everybody is affected differently. And that's why you have some children with cerebral palsy who grow up to become, you know, great talents. And, you know, like the lady you talk about who, she's not just a lawyer, she has a master's degree. You understand? And I have quite a few of them like that. Now with autism, what you have people who have excelled in academics, in mathematics and so on, even though they have autism. That's one side. There are those who have excelled in music. There are those who have excelled in drawing. From memory, they can draw anything. Okay? They have that memory. But then you have some of them that can do nothing. Or that they draw tantrums. Okay? That, I mean, even the parents that can handle them. They're the ones you see at the airport, they just freak out and everybody is saying, Madam, control your child. And the woman is just, she's just so upset because you just don't know what she's going through and so on. So instead of saying, Madam, control your child, it's like, you know, you could say something better. Okay? So when we have knowledge, we'll see that. Education makes all these things open. Getting the right institutions out there makes it open. Getting government and private sector to see how they can assist. Now, you would say some of the schools are expensive because they're private, but then they are doing the right thing. So the thing is to find private sector individuals who will sponsor these children. If you go to homes for children, motherless babies and or whatever you call them, you'll be shocked to see the schools some of those children are going to, because people sponsor them and many of them have been found to be very brilliant. They're doing well. And we are beginning to discover that virtually every disability has the potential to produce brilliant individuals. So let's open up more room, more opportunities for these children.
Wow, well said. Thank you so much for the thoughts you brought to the table. We believe that those people with disability in Nigeria can have a better deal from the government of the day. So finally, I just want one word from you. What's your expectation from the incoming government? Just something for those people with disability.
It's going to get better.
Get better. And Ijeoma, what can you add to that?
Enlighten the populace.
Okay, more sensitization, you say. Thank you so much, Ijeoma Ugu, convener, Walk Awake Autism, for joining us on the show today. We've also had Femi Badebo, he is the founder of Benola's Cerebral Palsy Initiative. Thank you so much. It's been great having you both on the show. Okay, this is still Nigeria Decides on Plus TV Africa. We'll take a quick break and the show returns in just a moment.
Hey, Adu! Look, I got something for you!
A football chassis?
Hey, Adu, come watch a game with your uncle and I.
Please, come.
I'm okay, thanks. The kind of person that you asked me to be. My brother say you love me, I love him too. I tell him I will do anything for you. But it's strange.
Did you see how many goals they scored?
They scored 2. I look up like this, say, who are you?
So, Daddy, you showed those blues Pepe yesterday, right?
You sure did.
Those 3 points are sure for us today.
Remind me how.
The game is about to start. Quick, please.
For upcoming artists to blow in Nigeria.
Welcome to Plus Trending. I am Buki November, your host, saying thank you for joining us on today's episode.
Welcome back. It's tea time on Plus TV Africa.
Practice makes perfect. I'm not perfect yet, but I'm a lot better than I used to be.
He's a king. He's entitled to marry 100 if he wants to.
Today's top stories are...
And the Pentecostal Fellowship of Nigeria. I'm here at Yunus Bashorin Street, where the
fire destroyed our transformer completely. The lowest level you can.
I'm Black Banda. This is Plus TV Africa. The big stories live here.
Big stories live here.
Big stories live here.
Hey, what's up guys? You're welcome to another edition of Plus Event, and I remain your host, Ifeoluwa Oshukeye.